restless dreams, I see that town. Silent Hill.
A letter starts everything. Whether you played it into Silent 1 or hear about it now, Silent Hill 2 is a story that keeps its power year after year. It trusted players to read symbolism, to sit with discomfort, to discover that the town is a mirror. Hi, by the way. Silent Hill 2 didn't become a classic because it was scary. It became a classic because it made fear personal. It took guilt, shame, and denial and turned them into streets you could walk down. For a lot of players, this is the example of a psychological horror done right. The original is turning 24 this year, and most people today will probably meet it through Bluebird Team's 2024 remake. I missed the original when it was released, so my first real trip through Silent Hill was with the remake, and that colors everything I'm about to say. And oh boy, I have a lot to say. In this video, I will tell you how I experienced James Sunderland's journey for the first time, the secrets and symbolism I noticed along the way, and why for me, the real horror of Silent Hill 2 isn't monsters or fog, it's the story of what an ordinary person is capable of. It just so happens that the stories in the Silent Hill series are tied together in a very specific way. There is the first game, which lays the groundwork for the town and all the occult stuff connected to it. Then there is the third one, which acts as a direct continuation of the first. Standing apart is the second game, which has no real connection to the first or the third, except for the setting where everything takes place. The fourth game is supposedly loosely tied to the second, but it tells its own story altogether. In fact, it wasn't even supposed to become part of the series and ended up being the final game created by Team Silent, the original development team and the founders of the franchise. Everything that came afterward was Konami's attempt to revive a dead patient, so for now we will leave those alone. The last major attempt to develop a big project in the franchise happened over 11 years ago, when Hideo Kojima teased Silent Hills in a very original way. But fans barely had time to pop champagne and celebrate the return of their beloved series, before internal conflicts led to Kojima getting kicked out of Konami, and the project was cancelled. Meanwhile, over in Krakow, Poland, a studio called Bluebird Team decided to seriously make their mark in the horror scene. They first became known thanks to a small, conceptual project called Layers of Fear, which was supposedly inspired by Kojima's PT. After that came the cyberpunk horror Observer, a game sequel to Blair Witch, and eventually The Medium. Already back then it felt like with The Medium, Bluebird Team was just a little too inspired by Silent Hill, at least visually, atmospherically, and even in terms of story, the similarities were obvious. They even brought in Akira Yamaoka, the composer of the Silent Hill series, to work on the soundtrack. Some particularly bold folks even claim that The Medium was basically a test project for the studio, meant to prove they could create bigger, more serious titles. And sure enough, just half a year after its release, Konami and Bluebird Team announced a strategic partnership. So naturally there was no question about which franchise Konami would hand over to Bluebird Team. The only real question was whether it would be another half-ass continuation or something else entirely. But by that point, we could already guess, because, let's face it, we live in the age of remakes. And so, on October 19, 2022, during an official online event, Konami announced what Bluebird Team had been working on under their wing, a remake of Silent Hill 2. The community was immediately intrigued by the news, since Bluebird Team already had some pretty solid projects under their belt. But one factor still caused some concern, and that was gameplay. The studio's previous titles were all psychological horrors, mostly walking simulators with hide-and-seek mechanics. But the original Silent Hill 2 wasn't a psychological horror, it was a survival horror, with a combat system, resource management, and all that. And then came October 8, 2024. The remake was released. Today, we are going to talk about what it turned out to be and the impression it left on me. I'll try not only to touch on the story, but also explain certain things as I understood them. And of course, as always, let me remind you that I'm not some kind of lore expert. I might misunderstand or get things wrong. If that happens, I invite you to the comments where you can point out exactly where I slipped up. I read every single one of them, and I really do value your feedback. And on that note, let's dive into the fascinating town of Silent Hill and try to uncover all its secrets. The game begins with a scene in a filthy roadside restroom where we first meet our main character, James Sunderland. After finishing his hygienic routine, James steps outside and tells us that he recently received a letter from his wife, Mary. In this letter, Mary asks James to come to Silent Hill, to their so-called special place. The place James once promised to take her to, but the trip never happened. And now Mary is there, all alone, waiting for James. There is just one small problem. Mary has been dead for 3 years. Standing there, staring at the mist-covered lake, James wrestles with the thought, could it really be possible that the love of his life is still alive, waiting for him in this town, just as the letter says? And what exactly is this special place? Because when they once visited Silent Hill together, the whole town was their special place. Still, James decides to go to Silent Hill to figure it all out and find Mary. The beginning of the game mirrors the original completely, keeping that same note of loneliness. You walk for a long time through the woods, surrounded by impenetrable fog that doesn't let you see anything at all, and your only companion is the absolute silence of the deserted forest. This peaceful, almost meditative walk continues, right up until we meet Angela. And here I want to make a little pause. As I mentioned earlier, I never played the original Silent Hill 2 back in the day, so I never became one of those die-hard fans. But even I heard the collective outrage echoing everywhere when Bloober Team revealed the new Angela in the remake. And yeah, I will admit, when you look at the Angela from the original game, the Angela in the remake is clearly different. But let's leave that discussion for later, because I do have something to say on it. I'll just drop a small spoiler here. The character of Angela, and especially the actress voicing her, ended up being one of the absolute highlights of the entire game for me. Angela, in many ways, is similar to us, since she also came to Silent Hill in search of someone dear to her, her mother. She thought she might also find her father and brother here, but she can't seem to find them anywhere. When we ask her how to get to the town, she reacts sharply, telling us to give up on the idea, since Silent Hill is a very dangerous place. James, however, makes the reasonable point that he doesn't have a choice. Someone he loves is there, and he has to go. After a brief exchange, we part ways with Angela and head off for a full-scale exploration of the town of Silent Hill, a place where something strange and terrifying is clearly going on. Everything is covered in thick fog, which prevents us from seeing more than a few meters ahead. What strikes us immediately is how absolutely empty the town feels, as if it's been abandoned. There isn't a single soul on the streets or inside any buildings. On the road, we notice what seems to be traces of blood, or maybe something even nastier. Soon enough, James notices strange figures moving in the fog, shapes that clearly don't inspire much confidence. And in the best traditions of horror genre, what's the most logical thing James could possibly do after seeing all of this? Well, of course, call out to the strange figure and follow it, which leads us into an abandoned house, where this figure promptly attacks us. Actually, as I understand it, the moment when James first picks up a weapon was slightly changed in the remake compared to the original, but the developers handled the source material with real warmth and soul, creating special memory points scattered throughout the game. For example, in this case, the moment of getting the first weapon was moved from the dark alleyway into this house, but the alley itself is still there and you can interact with it. Collect all those memory spots in a single playthrough, and you even get an achievement for it, which is doubly nice for long-time fans of the game. In our case, James finds his very first weapon, a wooden plank, right in this abandoned house, where the nasty little shit attacks us. And here I would like to pause and focus on two things: the combat system and the camera, which I haven't mentioned before. Both mechanics can really be summed up in a single sentence: Silent Hill 2 Remake is Resident Evil. The camera in the original game, which as far as I know was itself borrowed from Resident Evil, worked well back in the day. But, well, those days are gone. The developers have even admitted that the original camera wasn't made for atmosphere, but simply due to technical limitations. even though, of course, it still had a certain charm. The new over-the-shoulder camera is, obviously, inspired by Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake. If I remember correctly, that was exactly what triggered yet another wave of outrage from Silent Hill 2 fans at the time of the announcement. They claimed that with this camera, the game would lose its identity, that it wouldn't be Silent Hill anymore, just another Resident Evil. But let's stop here for a second and remind ourselves, what was Silent Hill to begin with? It was Konami's answer to Capcom's Resident Evil, which was dominating the late 90s. Even back then, Silent Hill games copied a lot from Resident Evil, only shifting the genre away from scientific zombie sci-fi into religious, psychological madness. And now, when we have got a whole trainload of successful Resident Evil remakes, what's the most logical step Konami could take while making a Silent Hill 2 remake? Well, that's right, Konami closes the historical loop and repeats the Resident Evil formula once again. Only this time, the remake formula. Personally, I don't see anything bad or shameful in this. The Resident Evil formula works brilliantly and keeps racking up praise after praise. But that's just my opinion, as someone who never played the original Silent Hill 2 or other games in the series. That's why I would really love to hear your opinion, especially from longtime fans of the franchise. And now, let me take my classic little pause and ask you, my dear viewer, for a small favor. For a small but growing channel like mine, your support is incredibly important. Whether it's a like, a comment, or especially a subscription. You cannot even imagine how much a simple like, which takes just a second of your time, motivates me and lifts my spirits after weeks of grinding away on a video. And reading every one of your comments about your thoughts on the game, your impressions and experiences. Well, there are no words to describe how much I enjoy that. Oh, and don't forget those comments about my accent, I love those too. So, if it's not too much trouble, please consider supporting my channel in any way you like. Thank you in advance to each and every one of you. And now, let's get back to exploring Silent Hill's mysteries. We stopped at the moment of our very first fight with the monster. Nothing too special, just smack it in the face a few times and move on. By the way, these monsters are called lion figures, and I will explain what they actually represent later in the chapter, where I dive into all the fucked up shit happening around here, and why it's happening at all. Here we also find the old radio, from which James hears a broken, static-laced message in the voice of his dead wife. And from this moment, the full exploration of Silent Hill begins, trying to figure out where to go and what to do. This is where the differences from the original become a lot more obvious, since new puddles and new locations to explore were added. And, of course, the perspective. We are no longer watching events unfold from a distance, but right from behind James' shoulder, which massively increases the sense of immersion. You could also smash car and house windows, and not just for fun, but with actual rewards like supplies and even whole new rooms packed with loot. The best part is that while these areas are optional, they are crafted with real care. These are not copy-paste rooms like in other games, where you just poke around endlessly like you're stuck in the Groundhog Day. Every space feels deliberate and handmade, and that turns exploring Silent Hill into a separate kind of joy. Sometimes you stumble upon extra resources, other times a secret shop filled to the brim with supplies, and so on. The city itself becomes less and less welcoming, with monsters like the one we killed earlier showing up on the streets more often. And what about us? After solving the jukebox puzzle, it plays a song familiar to James and to the players. It's the piece Mary used to love playing on the piano. Thanks to this, James realizes that their special place must be Rosewater Park, located on the shores of Toluca Lake. With that revelation, our protagonist firmly decides to head there. But before that, stepping into the bar's courtyard, James finds a bloodstained jacket near a car that looks suspiciously like his own. And even earlier, while exploring the streets, we came across corpses that looked suspiciously like James himself. Interesting, isn't it? And what could that mean? Well, hold on, I will explain later. On the way, we are suddenly caught in a storm. Visibility drops even lower, and every enemy we had already killed is back on its feet, shambling around the streets once more. The only real shelter for James turns out to be the Woodside apartments. In a room behind the reception desk, we find an unusual cabinet with 5 circular slots for coins, along with a riddle in a verse that we'll have to solve in order to reach the contents of this strange piece of furniture. And to do that, James needs to scour the whole apartment complex and track down the coins. And here we are greeted by a few truly legendary enemies. In the room where James finally gets his desperately needed flashlight, we encounter the mannequin for the first time, made of 2 legs on the bottom and, well, 2 legs on top. Again, if you have never played Silent Hill 2 before and think these enemies looks bizarre, and yes, they really do, don't worry. Toward the end of my review, I will explain exactly what they are and what they symbolize. After fending off the attack, James noticed that the mannequin he picked the flashlight from is dressed in a very familiar outfit. It's Mary's clothes, just as he remembers them. In fact, it's the exact outfit she is wearing in the photograph James keeps close to his chest. Here we also find our first serious weapon, a handgun, and we meet a little girl who stomps on James' hand and balls straight into the darkness. And of course, how can we forget the most legendary enemy in Silent Hill 2, Pyramid Head. We'll run into this guy more than once during our journey, and I will explain his meaning later. But for now, let me just say that he feels like a pure, unstoppable force, something that James cannot possibly fight against. After picking up the pistol, in the very next room from where the Pyramid Head was, James discovers a corpse slumped in front of a TV. The protagonist doesn't dare remove the blood-soaked cloth covering the man's face, but I think we all know exactly whose face we would see underneath. While wandering through the apartment complex, James hears someone retching loudly behind the door. Following the sound, we enter an apartment where a body is crammed into the kitchen's fridge. And checking the bathroom, the source of the noises, we find a chubby young man in a full-blown panic, Eddie Dombrowski. The moment Eddie sees James, he frantically denies everything, claiming he has nothing to do with the dead body in the kitchen and that it was already there before he arrived. After James calls him down, Eddie introduces himself and explains that he is not from around here either. He ended up in Silent Hill because someone had been chasing him. Running away, he hid in this very apartment complex, and when we suggest leaving the cursed town together, Eddie agrees at first, even offering to escape with James. But James refuses. He is still searching for someone important to him, and this clearly saddens the poor guy. After wishing each other good luck, the two part ways, and we return to hunting down the coins needed to solve the cabinet puzzle. Once we collect them all and solve the riddle, we are rewarded with the key to apartment 201. And right there, before our eyes, begins a scene of pure depravity. Pyramid Head with a mannequin. Not wanting to interrupt the romance, James hides himself in a closet, praying his presence won't be noticed. But of course, it was a bad idea. Pyramid Head immediately stops what he was doing and slowly, menacingly, turns his attention toward the closet. James, realizing he has been discovered, unloads an entire magazine straight into Pyramid Head's iron helmet, which is, the most logical weak spot. And the funniest thing is, that dumb move actually works. Pyramid Head, apparently stunned by the sheer stupidity of it all, retreats in a hurry. After climbing out of the closet, James unlocks the only available door and finds himself facing a breach leading into another building on the second floor. Crossing the gap, James enters a new set of apartments, the Blue Creek Apartments. And it's important to note, this transition is also the first time the world switches from the foggy reality into the alternative version, the Other World. The Other World is essentially a nightmare dimension, where the entire environment transforms into a twisted, grotesque version of itself. Everything is rusted, broken, cracked, and far more terrifying than anything we have seen so far. And James? Well, you know him. He just cannot resist sticking his hand into something. And if it were just a weird hole in the wall, that would be one thing. But here, James goes all in, and, well, you see for yourself. In one of the Blue Creek apartments, James runs into Angela again, and her behavior has changed drastically. She sits there, lifelessly staring at the massive kitchen knife, which naturally puts James in a very uneasy state of mind about what she might be planning. Her own search hasn't progressed much, and when James asks about her mother, Angela reacts sharply and defensively. Still trying to be polite, she asks James about his progress. James decides to be brutally honest with her. He shows Angela a photo of Mary, telling her that this is the person he is looking for. and revealing the fact that she actually died 3 years ago. And this news throws Angela into a panic. She immediately blurts out that she has to find her mother right away. And James, being the gentleman he is, offers to accompany her since the town is dangerous, but Angela refuses. She doesn't want to hold him back. As for the enormous knife, Angela admits that she is better off without it. She asks James to hold on to it, because if she keeps it, something very bad might happen. But the moment we try to take it from her, Angela suddenly points the blade at us, and then, almost in tears, apologizes for her behavior, sets the knife down, and bolts out of the room. And, of course, James keeps the knife for himself. From there, after solving a number of puzzles of varying difficulty, we approach the climax of the Otherworld apartments. Descending to the first floor, we enter a hold filled with metal cages, where none other than the Pyramid Head is prowling, this time armed with his iconic great knife. And since he now has a weapon, he is eager to test it out in a fight against us. In both the original and the remake, this boss fight isn't the one you meant to win. James' pistol and plank with nails don't stand a chance of putting Pyramid Head down. The battle is purely a matter of survival. All you need to do is stay alive and keep dodging him around the arena. Toward the end, things get harder as Pyramid Head starts moving faster, but with the right skill, you can get through the entire fight without firing a single bullet. Once the timer runs out, the air is filled with the sound of a siren, and Pyramid Head loses all interest in James. We finally escape the Otherworld and miraculously return to the fog-covered streets of Silent Hill. But now we have emerged on the far side of the apartment, where the path ahead leads us directly toward Rosewater Park. On the way to the park, James spots a little girl sitting on the fence, the same rat who earlier screwed him over back in the Woodside apartments. The kid is clearly hostile toward our protagonist, and when he tries to talk to her, she just snaps back with insults and straight up calls James an idiot. The girl is clutching an envelope in her hands, and when James notices it, she yells that he never loved Mary before jumping down on the other side of the fence, ending the conversation. The fact that some rude little girl just mentioned his wife's name understandably rattles James, but since he can't question her any further, our protagonist decides to keep moving toward the park. But as James approaches a gazebo, he spots a silhouette in the distance. Not believing his eyes, he calls out, "Mary!" But when the woman turns around, he realizes he is mistaken. Still, James's confusion is easy to understand. This woman really does look an awful lot like his late wife, with only her hairstyle, clothes, and eye color being different. And the similarities don't stop there, because when James explains that he thought she was his deceased spouse, the woman introduces herself as Maria. Maria's personality, however, is much more forward than Mary's, and she wastes no time proving it. She even tries to touch James so he can feel her warmth. Naturally, this makes James extremely uncomfortable, and he tries to quickly back out of the situation. But Maria stops him and starts asking about the reason he came here. James tells Maria about the special place he and Mary shared, which he believed was Rosewater Park. But now he admits he might be wrong, since he can't remember exactly which place it was. Maria then takes the initiative and suggests that nearby there is a spot that's always been popular with couples. Since James is looking for his beloved, why not check it out together? Honestly, I would rather not even imagine how Mary would react to James showing up with such a bold, flirty woman at his side. So James and Maria begin marking their way through the town, looting anything that isn't nailed down. Moving further, the town gets swallowed again by an even thicker fog, and with it come swarms of monsters spilling out in the streets. Seeing this, James tries to hide with Maria in the alley, blocking the way behind them with his wooden plank and picking up a steel pipe in exchange. But the alley itself is crawling with creatures, and after forcing their way through the horde, the two finally find a hole in the fence that lets them escape. After this miraculous getaway, the road of adventure leads our duo in the local strip club where Maria used to work, Heaven's Night. She teases us by dancing around the pole on the stage for a laugh, but at the same time, she tries to comfort James, saying she actually likes his craziness, that he's wandering around searching for his wife who died 3 years ago, and she doesn't see it as something insane. She actually sees it as an unbreakable ray of hope. The place Maria has been leading us to all along turns out to be a small square with a stone statue of a young woman tied to a local legend, which Maria gladly shares with James. Once upon a time, a girl lived in these lands who was accused of witchcraft and sentenced to death by exile to an island in the middle of the lake. But there was a man in town who loved her, and every night he secretly rode out to the island with supplies of food and love. To guide him through the darkness, the girl would stand at the shore with a candle in her hands, and the plan worked perfectly, until one day, when a terrible storm broke out, blowing out the candle and capsizing his boat in the raging waves. The man fought as hard as he could, refusing to give up, but in the end, he drowned. The girl, however, never gave up hope and kept coming to the shore with her candle, waiting to guide her beloved back. In time, the people made her into a local saint, a patroness of undying love. But instead of finding comfort in this story, James only feels worse, because Mary isn't here, and she couldn't possibly be here, since he has never once in his life been to this square. And here is the interesting part. James doesn't just fail to recognize the place in his own memory, but neither will players who know the original. This entire scene, the park, the statue, the legend, is completely new, and it wasn't in the original game at all. Maria tries to reassure James, but the moment is cut short by someone's scream, echoing from a nearby building. Hearing it, James immediately gets up and suggests they go check out who it was and why they were screaming. That building turns out to be the local movie theater. James bravely climbs in through a broken window, telling Maria to wait outside. Inside, he hears voices coming from the auditorium, belonging to none other than our old acquaintance Eddie and that same cheeky little girl. The first time we meet Eddie, he told us someone was chasing him, and now we learn it was the police, and he ran off to Silent Hill to escape. According to him, the cops have stopped pursuing him, but still Eddie is clearly pissed at James for leaving him alone the last time they crossed paths. Then the projector light suddenly cuts out, and Eddie figures it must be the girl's doing, the girl whose name we finally learn, Laura. James, eager to ask her what she knows about Mary, goes off to find her and invites Eddie to come along. But Eddie, sulking and offended, refuses to haul his ass out of the chair and just keeps eating ice cream straight out of the tub with his bare hands. But of course, we don't manage to catch Laura. The quick little thing bolts out of the theater, clearly not interested in running into James again. Rushing outside, we realize that not only did she blow past James, but also ran straight by Maria, heading directly into Brookhaven Hospital, another one of the classic locations from the original Silent Hill 2. Arriving at the hospital, our heroes catch up with Laura on the stairwell, where she's busy covering the walls with her drawings. Unfortunately, the conversation doesn't happen this time either, since Laura bolts again, thoughtfully locking the door behind her. After solving a simple little quest involving the basement and refueling the generator, our heroes heads up to the second floor to continue the search for Laura. But no sooner do they get there than Maria suddenly feels unwell. She slips into one of the patient rooms, saying she doesn't feel good and wants to rest for a while. And from this point, James is left on his own once again. Exploring the hospital's corridors and rooms, we encounter new monsters, nurses, armed with the same kind of steel pipe James carries. These girls are pretty dangerous opponents, but luckily our firepower ramps up too, since we find ourselves a shotgun. During the hunt for the bracelets that we discuss later, we can stop by Maria's room for a quick check-in. She still isn't feeling great, but she appreciates the attention and thanks James for caring. James continues wandering the hospital until he finds Laura. He wants to know how she knows about Mary, and Laura tells him that they met in the hospital a year ago. This causes James to snap, calling her a liar, but he quickly tries to calm down, not wanting to scare the girl. And fair enough, it does sound like total nonsense, since Mary died 3 years ago. After that, James decides the best move is to get Laura out of here, because the hospital is crawling with monsters, and it's obviously no place for a little girl. Laura, though, doesn't really seem to grasp what danger he's talking about. Still, pretending to settle down, she suddenly remembers she needs to pick up a letter. And not just any letter, but one from Mary herself, which she claims to have hidden in the next room. James, of course, blindly volunteers to fetch it, not realizing that Laura is just playing him. She takes the chance to lock James inside, and from a safe distance start mocking the poor bastard. And then James hears something dangerous approaching. That something turns out to be a monster dropping from the ceiling, the flesh lip. It's basically a body wrapped in a sack, with legs sticking out and lips grotesquely placed around its, well, scrotch area. The whole homunculus is suspended in a metal frame that serves both its weapon and its protection. The boss hides in the ceiling, dropping down suddenly to ambush us. Later stages of the fight introduce new moves to keep things unpredictable. It's an interesting battle, especially given the cramped space. Just keep running corner to corner, blast it with a shotgun, and victory is yours. After defeating the boss, James approaches to inspect the body, but suddenly another one crawls out of the ceiling and drags him straight into the otherworld version of the hospital. The central puzzle of this area is a box locked with 3 separate locks. To open it, we need to learn the stories of 3 patients the hospital's chief physician was never able to cure. I skipped over this detail earlier when talking about Brookhaven Hospital, but at the start we had to collect the bracelets of 3 especially difficult patients to solve a local riddle. In this segment, though, we actually learned the methods the chief doctor used in treating those poor souls. One patient suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and the treatment was lobotomy. So the first key is found in the eye socket of a mannequin, which we dig out with Latocom. The second patient suffered from depressive psychosis and was pumped full of pills. The key to his lock is a number combination written in his diary. Finally, the last patient had intermediate explosive disorder, characterized by bursts of aggression. His treatment was electroconvulsive therapy, in plain terms, the electric chair. The code we need is revealed on this device. We will even face the otherworld version of those same nurses, but this time they are armed with kitchen knives instead of pipes. And these knives suspiciously resemble the one we got from Angela. And after all this effort, you would expect the box to hold something significant. Well, I don't know, maybe a grenade launcher would be good. But no, when James finally opens it, he finds nothing. Before he can even get upset though, a statue with an elevator button reveals itself in the wall behind him. And there we meet Maria again, who is completely freaking out now that the hospital has shifted into its otherworld form. She lashes out at James, yelling that while he's running around chasing his dead wife's corpse, she's stuck here, all alone. Still, they two quickly make peace and try to escape, managing it fairly well at first. But just before they reach the exit, Pyramid Head catches up with them. The duo sprints down the hallway, desperately trying to make it into the elevator. But in true horror movie fashion, Maria decides it's the perfect time to stumble, and the elevator doors begin to close mercilessly. James struggles to hold them open long enough for Maria to slip inside, but he doesn't make it. Right in front of his eyes, Maria, who had helped him so much, who looked so like Mary, is killed by that terrifying, incomprehensible, pyramid-headed monster. The event hits James hard, almost breaking him, but at the last moment, he gathers himself and realizes he has no choice but to push forward. We find ourselves once again on the first floor of Brookhaven Hospital, and after pulling himself together, James decides to keep moving forward. Soon after, he spots Laura running out of the hospital and naturally follows her. As we can see, the world is still in its otherworld state, which means danger could be waiting for the little girl at every corner. James rushes after her immediately, fending off the swarms of monsters now flooding the town. Along the way, we come across strange notes. It's unclear who wrote them, but they address directly to James. The message is roughly the same in each one. If you're willing to stare into the abyss and see what lies within, then keep moving forward. Maybe you really can walk this path. Following the notes one by one, James once again arrives at Rosewater Park, and just as he sets foot inside the park, reality suddenly shifts back into foggy Silent Hill. Here, James encounters Angela again, standing near the very statue we need. Angela seems lost in thought, and when James asks if she's feeling better, she answers with a philosophical little speech about how everything changes, how nothing stays the same. She adds that her mother probably is not in this town at all, and even if she was, she doesn't want to see Angela anymore. When James suggests they move forward together, Angela refuses. And when he casually asks if she has seen a little girl around, Angela suddenly screams and bolts. James watches her run off, trying hard not to roll his eyes and spin his finger at his temple, but then he remembers why he came here in the first place. Digging into the ground at the base of the statue, he unearths a box containing a letter with cryptic instructions, telling him to head to the Silent Hill Historical Society, along with the key to the building. And here begins a moment of eerie calm, the proverbial quiet before the storm. The entire path from the park to the Historical Society is empty, and it even feels like the town has reverted to its original state. The journey is quiet, desolate, and utterly lonely. The Silent Hill Historical Society is, in simple terms, the town's museum. But the first thing that grabs James' attention upon entering is a painting titled "Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment." It depicts an executioner with a pyramid on his head. James instantly recognizes the figure from the picture as the creature that's been stalking him, Pyramid Head. But how it came to be on the streets of Silent Hill and why it's chasing James remains in complete mystery. Studying the painting and notes inside, James learns that Silent Hill once housed a Toluca Prison camp. It was used to hold prisoners during the American Civil War in 1862. Later, this camp was converted into a fully functioning prison, still under the same name. Unsurprisingly, the prison became a site of inhuman practices. But where exactly was this prison? Directly beneath the Silent Hill Historical Society. The prison itself was demolished in the 20th century, and the Historical Society was built on top of its ruins, which means logically James should have no way of ended up inside a prison that no longer exists. The descent into the prison marks the beginning of the end. Sure, there is still a long run ahead before the finale, but from here on out there will be no more breaks. The time has come to decide. Are we capable of facing our mistakes, our sins? Can we forgive ourselves and keep on living, or not? James finds himself in the prison cafeteria. At one of the tables lies a corpse with a bullet hole in its head. Nearby, against the wall, stands our old acquaintance Eddie, revolver in his hand, musing about how easy it really is to take someone's life. He's no longer the timid, scared chubby guy we met before. He even puts on a bit of a show, aiming the gun at James for a moment, before quickly brushing it off and saying he was just joking, that the body was already there when he came in. After having its fun at James' expense, Eddie decides to leave the cafeteria, and James presses on and finds himself in the prison block. The central puzzle of this location revolves around a set of scales beneath the statue of Themis in the prison courtyard. The prison itself is divided into multiple sections, each sealed behind an iron door marked with a different animal. To open each section, James must place weights on the scale in such a way that the needle points to the symbol of the correct animal. While running through these sections, he finds the various weights of different mass, eventually balancing the scales and unlocking the final puzzle. When the scales are balanced, Themis drops a sword, which turns out to be the executioner's lever. Behind the statue is revealed a gallows with 6 nooses and a plaque containing a riddle. James is presented with 6 cases of condemned prisoners, described in rhyme, and must determine which of the 6 least deserves to die. If he chooses correctly, James approaches the gallows, pulls the correct noose, and the trapdoor beneath his feet opens. He lands in morgue, where he finds yet another hole in the floor, and of course jumps right in. Then he finds another hole, and, well, you guessed it, jumps down again. And the descent still isn't over. After this series of drops, James rides an elevator down, only to emerge into a strange corridor, resembling the hallway of an apartment building. On the floor lies a bloodstained newspaper. The small article it contains describes the murder of a lumberjack named Thomas Orozco. Cause of death: multiple stab wounds to the neck with a sharp object. Since nothing was stolen from the apartment, and considering that Thomas was known to drink heavily and had a tendency toward aggression, the police concluded the murder likely stemmed from a personal conflict, possibly committed in a fit of passion. And this newspaper is no coincidence. It directly points to the murder of Angela's father. And remembering how we first found her lying with a bloody knife, the very knife James is still carrying, we can finally piece it together. Who really killed Thomas Orozco? And here I would like to pause for just a moment, my dear viewer, to explain why I still rank Silent Hill 2 above every other survival horror I have ever played. First, I want to explain how I see fear in horror games. For me, there are two levels of fear: the surface level and deep horror. Most horror games stick to surface level, trying to scare you with creepy monsters and jump scares, and I absolutely despise jump scares with all my heart. By the way, credit where it's due, Bluebird team didn't stuff the remake with those god-awful cheap jump scares, aside from the mannequins who just love hiding in a corner and smacking you in the back when you start exploring a room. Now, the deep level of fear is what I value most: atmosphere and story. But not story in the sense of, well, zombie attacked us and my best friend died from zombies and now everything is bad. No, I mean the kind of story that makes your hair literally stand on end and send a chill crawling down your spine. I especially respect everyday horror, the kind that shows the monstrosities not of some abstract creatures, but of ordinary people living among us. That's why I have been eyeing the Feast of Atom series for a long time, and I hope I will eventually make a video on it. And if you would like to see it sooner rather than later, please let me know in the comments. And so, returning to everyday horror, the beauty of Silent Hill's story is that so many of its events resolve exactly around that concept. Yes, they are dressed up with monsters, blood, and disturbing sounds, but at its core, the story is rooted in simple human sins. Take Angela's story and her family. Honestly, when it finally hit me why she behaved so strangely, I got a lump in my throat and chills down my spine. As you remember, we concluded that Angela was responsible for her father's death. But why? Well, she had her reasons. Because, as the game suggests, her father did, well, things to her that no father ever should. And that left her with psychological scars for the rest of her life. I think you can guess what I'm hinting at here, because YouTube really doesn't like it when people talk openly about such topics. And this trauma explains Angela's erratic behavior, her rapid mood swings from one extreme to another. And while the game never says it directly, it strongly hints that Angela's brothers followed in her father's footsteps, though his fate is unknown. The only person who was ever truly close to Angela was her mother, the one she was trying to find in Silent Hill. But by now it's clear even to her that her mother is not here, and all that's left for Angela is suffering. And as promised, a quick word about Angela's actress in the remake. I've heard plenty of opinions saying they ruined her, that the acting was bad, and especially that her voice was terrible. But I completely disagree with that. In fact, I think the rasp in her voice actually adds to the character's mystery, making her more intriguing. But I would love to hear your take on this in the comments. James finds Angela collapsed on the floor in a hysterical state, begging him not to touch her. Suddenly she spots her daddy behind him, the monster who burst through the wall to attack. And now we finally get a good look at him. The design is highly abstract. It looks like two bodies lying on top of each other on a bed, wrapped tightly in skin. Well, I think the symbolism here is pretty obvious. This thing becomes our next boss, a chase through a labyrinth of corridors where we have to inflict damage while escaping. Along the way, we also destroy TVs, blaring the voice of Angela's father, berating her. The apartment-like corridors gradually shift, the wallpaper walls transforming into fleshy, skin-covered chambers. Eventually, We reach an arena and face the monster in a direct one-on-one fight. Once Daddy is defeated and collapses, Angela storms in, furious, kicking the monster's body before toppling a TV onto it. When James tries to calm her, she lashes out, screaming that he's no better than her father, that all men only want one thing, a bloodborne remaster. She breaks down into tears, blaming her father again. James gently tells her he means her no harm, that all he wants is to find Mary, to which Angela bitterly replies, "You're Mary. She used to be yours, but then you got tired of her, and you just found someone else." Angela then says she's going to look for her mother, and James, left alone with his thoughts, can only quietly say that he would never do such a thing. Angela's words struck something deep inside James, but there is no time for reflection. Leaving the corridors behind, we push forward, searching for a way ahead. Well, most likely toward yet another pit or some hole in the wall, just begging James to shove his hand inside. But instead, we stumble upon a strange wall, one that refuses to let us pass. James goes around, opens the next door, and to his surprise, he finds Maria, alive and well. But the weirdness doesn't stop there. Maria has no memory of her death or what happened in the elevator. Even more disturbing, she behaves stranger than before, dropping hints about things only Mary could have known. But she isn't Mary. All of this leaves James completely rattled, but there is no choice. He has to keep moving and find a way to free Maria from her prison. To reach her, we are forced to solve another puzzle. This time, a cube-shaped mechanism that rotates the room behind it. Once the room is aligned correctly, a corridor opens with 3 different doors, each leading to its own area, and you can only enter one at a time. The first area is wrought in a way where we need to piece together a lighter and use it to burn through a rope, dropping a massive blood-soaked bundle onto the floor. The second door leads to an abandoned zone, split into 2 stacked levels. On the lower one, we'll run straight into Pyramid Head, literally, since this is his private chamber, with him circling it like a predator. The third and final area is Ruined. Here, James' combat skills are put to the test. 3 times we are locked in with enemies, and the only way out is to kill them all. Or, if you are low on ammo, just run in circles until the signal chime sounds. Eventually, we are forced back to that strange wall again. Only this time, Pyramid Head is chasing us from behind. And here comes the magic. The closer he gets, the more the wall begins to part. At last, it splits open, letting James through. We finally reach Maria's cell, only to find her beaten to death. For the second time, James watches the lifeless body of a woman who looks painfully close to his wife. He feels the agony of loss again, but after everything he has endured, his mind begins to fracture, twisting into rage, and that fury becomes the fuel to push onward. Returning to the cube mechanism, James finds it smashed, no doubt by Pyramid Head. Nearby, however, lies the Great Knife, Pyramid Head's signature weapon. Taking it allows James to go through the blocked passage we first encountered, leading him into a graveyard with some disturbingly familiar names carved on the stones: Angela Orozco, Eddie Dombrowski, and James Sunderland. Each grave already has a pit dug in front of it, foreshadowing the fates of these characters. James, no longer surprised by such grim omens, silently takes his place and descends into the pit bearing his own name. Another blood-soaked corridor, and another door. Stepping through it, we come face to face with Eddie, completely unhinged, standing over the corpses of the people he had just murdered. At this point, Eddie has fully gone off the rails. He screams about how everyone mocked him, laughed at him, called him fat, humiliated him. But what does it matter now? He has got a gun, and with one pull of the trigger, he can silence anyone forever. So, who is laughing now? Then he turns all that rage toward James. According to Eddie, James is just like the rest of the bullies, laughing at him from the very start. He raises his gun at James, But Sunderland's patience finally snaps, and the cocky bastard eats a fist right to the jaw. James doesn't hold back. He tells Eddie straight that he needs professional help. The catch is, unlike James, both Eddie and Angela already figured things out long ago. Eddie fires back, saying Silent Hill called James here just the same. In fact, Eddie claims they are more alike than James wants to admit. And to prove his point, he pulls out his revolver and challenges James to a duel in the next room. The fight begins, and during the confrontation Eddie spills his backstory. To keep it short, Eddie is a guy crushed under the weight of his own insecurities. He always saw himself as a loser, a failure of the genetic lottery. Women never wanted him, people mocked him, and eventually all that bottled-up bitterness exploded. He shot the dog of one of his tormentors, and then put a bullet through the owner's knee. After that, terrified of the prison sentence awaiting him, Eddie ran. His escape eventually led him straight into Silent Hill, and from there we have been bumping into him again and again, watching his mental state rot. From a man who once seemed frightened and even a little guilty, he has become a smug piece of shit, convinced he was right all along, and had acted out of some warped sense of justice. And now he wants to treat James the same way, by killing him. In battle, the chappy bastard thinks the darkness is his ally. He hides beyond our field of vision, darting out for sudden attacks. And even with his nasty tricks and freakish durability, well, this guy is able to shrug off direct shotgun blast to the gut. Eddie still ends up full of bleed, finally meeting his end. Throughout Silent Hill, James has slaughtered plenty of monsters, but killing an actual human being, well, that's something else entirely. And this time, there is no relief in the victory, only the weight of what he has done. Stepping outside, James finds himself at the pier of Toluca Lake. Interestingly, if at this point we suddenly decide to reread Mary's letter, the very one that brought us to this fog-covered town, we won't be able to. Inside the envelope, instead of the letter, lies nothing but a blank sheet of paper. On the pier, James discovers a boat, which he decides to use to cross to the other side of the lake, where the Lakeview Hotel is located. The place where he and Mary once stayed during the visit to Silent Hill, the last spot in town James can truly call their special place. He rolls toward a light burning on the far shore, just like in that very legend I told you about earlier. Following the glow, he eventually reaches the boathouse and then the hotel itself, which, strangely enough, seems completely untouched by the years. Indeed, unlike the other buildings in town, the hotel remains in neat condition. At the reception desk, we find a note addressed to James, telling him that the videotape he left behind in his room is safely stored in the locked section of the hotel. From the restaurant hall, the clumsy sound of a piano playing drifts out. Entering, we find Laura, who startles James with a loud slam on the keys. To our surprise, the girl's attitude toward James has changed. She is no longer trying to insult him. The thing is, since the last meeting, Laura has thought things over and decided James might actually help her find Mary. According to her guess, Mary must be somewhere inside Lakeview Hotel, since that is what she wrote in her letter. In this letter, James reads how much Mary loved Laura, how she wanted to adopt her and raise her together with James. But sadly, that dream never came true. From the looks of it, Mary wrote this letter shortly before her death. At the end of this letter, Mary wishes her little friend all the best and congrats her on turning 8. After finishing the letter, James asks Laura how old she is, and she answers that she just turned 8 last week. And here lies a huge inconsistency. If that's the case, then Mary couldn't have died 3 years ago, meaning the chance that she is truly alive is not absolute zero. But that's not all. Laura also says that there is another letter, one written specifically to James. She admits she hadn't given it to him earlier because she thought he didn't deserve it, but now he has changed her mind. She hands him the envelope, which is empty. Laura is completely confused since she was absolutely sure the letter was inside. Apparently, she dropped it somewhere, and she runs off to look for it. James tries to stop her, But a quick little rascal disappears into the hotel's corridors, and when James follows after her, he is suddenly attacked by monsters that have already overrun the building. Laura's trail goes cold, so James decides to focus on finding his way to room 312, the room he and Mary stayed in during their last visit to Silent Hill. But as you can guess, there is no direct way in. To get the key he needs, James has to solve a puzzle involving a jukebox. He must place inside it 3 figurines of fairy tale heroines: Snow White, Cinderella, and a Little Mermaid. The location of these figurines tie together into the themes of the fairy tales. For example, to get Snow White, we need to gather shards of a magic mirror scattered around one of the rooms and place an apple on a tray before it. Cinderella, fittingly, lies buried in a heap of ashes inside a fireplace. But when James reaches it, we are ambushed by the next boss, Mandarin, a grotesque, distorted female figure with enormous arms, the end of which looks disturbingly like labia. It's an interesting enough fight, but honestly nothing too memorable. After defeating her, James set off to find the last figurine, the Little Mermaid. The path there is quite unusual, since it's hidden in the hotel's basement bar. The direct road is blocked, but there is a way through the service corridors. We can get down there by using the staff elevator. But judging by the design, the damn thing must have been built by a complete idiot, because the moment James steps inside, it starts screaming about overload. So he is forced to give up his entire inventory, including weapons, health items, flashlight, and even his notes and map. After solving another riddle, James retrieves the basement key along with his forgotten videotape, and in a flooded room down below, he finally finds the Little Mermaid figurine. Approaching room 312, James holds his breath and steps inside, expecting to find Mary. But unfortunately, she is not there. And with nothing else to do, he decides to watch the tape. Sliding the tape into the player, James sits down in the chair before the TV. At first, there is nothing unusual. Mary speaking about how much she loves this town and this hotel. But then the footage shifts to James pressing a pillow against his sick wife's face, smothering her right there on the hospital bed. The recording cuts off, and in the darkened screen, James sees his own reflection. The face of a man who has just realized a bitter truth. A truth he had been desperately hiding from anyone, and above all, from himself. James killed Mary with his own hands, and forced himself to forget. An unsuspecting Laura walks into the room. Struggling to find the words, James tells her that his wife is not here, that she is dead. Laura refuses to believe it, but James insists it's the truth. Then the girl asks if Mary died from her illness. James admits to her that, in fact, it was he who killed her. Hearing this, Laura breaks down, screaming and demanding that he give Mary back, before running off in tears. And now, we finally get the chance to re-examine the game's events from a very different angle. As you have likely pieced together, Mary Sunderland didn't die 3 years ago, and certainly not from her illness, as James had convinced himself throughout most of the game. 3 years ago is when she first became sick, and that's the time frame James chose for his self-deception. From his perspective, once the illness began, the Mary he truly loved had already died. Despite the doctor's efforts, the disease kept progressing, and Mary's condition grew worse. James visited her in the hospital regularly, but her chances of recovery were slim, and it became clear to everyone that Mary wasn't going to get better. For James, it was agonizing to see his wife in such a state, and on top of that, he constantly had to endure her insults and outbursts. Eventually, his once beloved wife had become, in his eyes, a burden, someone who made his life unbearable. And one day, James couldn't take it anymore. Mary had been allowed to go home for a few days, and it was then that she wrote 2 letters, one for Laura, her young hospital companion, and another one for James himself. Then, on that tragic day at home, James walked into Mary's room with a pillow in his hands, and ended the suffering or so he thought. In truth, killing his wife left James utterly shattered, overwhelmed by guilt and trauma. To shield himself from the unbearable emotions, his mind unconsciously built an alternative reality, one where Mary had died 3 years earlier. But somewhere deep inside, James still longed for punishment for what he had done. That's why he placed Mary's body in the car and drove to the special place, Silent Hill. He justified his arrival with the illusion of a letter from his dead wife and set out to find her. By the way, there are multiple versions of Silent Hill. The first is the ordinary tourist town, where James and Mary had indeed stayed 3 years earlier, back when nothing supernatural was happening. The second one is the foggy world, a distinctly paranormal plane of existence, where the deepest fears, desires, and thoughts of the person entering the town take shape. These things, born from the interaction between the town's power and the human mind, are collectively known as manifestations. So, the monsters, the identical corpses resembling James, the absurd notes, and Mary's personal belongings, all of these are manifestations born straight out of James' mind. The monsters themselves, along with their grotesque appearances, are tied to different emotions within the protagonist, such as repressed sexuality, since James is a man in his prime and longs for intimacy, disgust toward his wife's disfigured, sickly body, and resentment over the constant insults she hurled at him. As you have probably realized, Maria is also a manifestation, an embodiment of James' idealized vision of Mary, the version of his wife he wishes she could have been, liberated, tender, loving, caring, sometimes even timid, so that James could feel like her protector. But to balance out this pleasant illusion, Silent Hill created its opposite, dark, brutal, merciless, Pyramid Head, the embodiment of James' guilt over killing his wife and his subconscious desire to be punished for it. Pyramid Head is an executioner sent to hunt the protagonist and torment him, killing Maria over and over again to remind James of what he has done. He is the monster most closely tied to James, his personal nightmare, in many ways a horrific reflection of the man himself. Yet not all the characters in the game are manifestations, because aside from James, there are 3 other real people in town: Angela, Eddie, and Laura. Eddie and Angela, like James, are plagued by their own inner traumas, and their fates mirror his in a certain ways. For all of them, the foggy Silent Hill appears the same, a deserted, empty town. But from time to time, each one of them is dragged into the other world, whose appearance changes depending on the person. We have already seen James' world, rusted and decaying. Eddie, whose trauma comes from constant humiliation and ridicule at the hands of others, experiences another world that resembles a morgue crossed with a meat locker. That's why our battle with him takes place in a similar environment, and why in every cutscene you can see his breath, as if he is exhaling cold mist. Angela, however, is explored in more depths, and her psychological state is by far the most tragic. She carries deep scars from the abuse inflicted by her father, followed by the trauma of killing him with a kitchen knife. She is so damaged by these events that Angela will never be able to live a normal life again. Her will to live is expressed in the childlike hope of finding someone who will love her, care for her, and heal her wounds through affection. That is why she is searching for her mother, the only member of her family who never abused her. Her personal otherworld takes the shape of her childhood home, the place where she endured the abuse, and the abstract daddy monster is her personal manifestation, just like Pyramid Head is for James. As for Laura, she is the exception. The town's power doesn't affect her at all, because as an 8-year-old girl, she carries no sins on her soul. For her, there are no monsters, no horrors, no warped realities, meaning she can move about Silent Hill freely, completely unharmed. We don't know much about her, but based on what we have learned, it's clear she is an orphan who, for some reason, was hospitalized in the same facility as Mary. The two got along quite well, and Mary, already dying by that point, often shared with Laura her most cherished memories, especially her visit to Silent Hill with James. So when Mary disappeared, Laura simply assumed she had literally gone to Silent Hill and set out to find her there. But after giving James a chance, just as Mary had asked her to, Laura ended up deeply disappointed. Once James realizes the bitter truth about his actions, the hotel's appearance changes. Most likely, he is being dragged once again into the other world, where the Lakeview now looks like a fire-ravaged, half-flooded ruin. James' pocket radio starts crackling again, and this time, he hears his wife's voice much clearer than in the beginning of the game. Mary calls to her husband, urging him to come quickly. He is so close now, she says. He just has to keep going and not give up. And so, James leaves the hotel room and makes his way through the crumbling hotel, descending on a barely functioning elevator. Behind one door, fire rages, and inside, he encounters Angela. She's standing on the staircase, engulfed in flames, staring at the body hanging from the wall, most likely her father's. Noticing James, she mistakes him for her mother, but when James steps closer, she realizes she is wrong. James tries to comfort her, but Angela doesn't want his sympathy. She thanks him for helping her earlier, but insists he shouldn't have, because even her own mother believed she was to blame for everything that happened to her. For Angela, there is only one way out left. She asks James to return her knife, and realizing what she means, James refuses to take on another sin by helping her end her life. Angela, however, assumes he wants to keep the knife for himself, and then, without any hesitation, she walks up the burning staircase. Eventually, James reaches a massive hall when he sees Maria bound in chains, guarded by two pyramid heads. James pleads with the executioner to leave Maria and him alone, and in response, they silently drive their spears through her body, killing Maria yet again before James' eyes. The protagonist now declares that he understands the true nature of Pyramid Head and why they were created. But now, with the truth fully revealed, he no longer needs them. Rising to his feet, James challenges his own conscience, and a pair of Pyramid Heads, armed with spears, are undoubtedly fearsome opponents, but the fight ends in an unusual way. The twin executioners acknowledge defeat. Standing before James, they lower the spears to the ground in unison, and then impale their own heads on them. After the death, James finds two axes in his hands, one symbolizing Mary, and the other symbolizing Maria. The hero leaves the battlefield and enters an impossibly long corridor, and a memory surfaces, an episode from the past when James came to visit Mary in the hospital, carrying a bouquet of flowers. But instead of joy, Mary erupted in anger, taking the flowers as mockery and driving him away. She told him she saw no meaning in her existence anymore and wished for death. But immediately afterward, she broke down in tears, begging James not to leave, to stay with her, to tell her that everything would be fine, that she wasn't going to die. After making his way through the corridor, James climbs the staircase and sees Mary standing by the window, waiting for her husband to arrive. The moment she sees him, she rushes into his arms. James admits how much he has missed her, but while Mary returns his affection, she also says something unsettling, that now they will be together forever. Hearing those words, James stiffens. Something is off. He instinctively says no, because standing before him is not his wife at all. It's Maria, who has taken on Mary's form. It's at this moment that James finally comes to terms with the truth. Mary is dead. She is gone, and no amount of denial can bring her back. Maria, hurt by rejection, doesn't take it well. She lashes out, declaring that she won't allow James to push her away, and she's not going to let him go. Before our eyes, Maria transforms into a monster. Her body becomes bound inside a twisted metallic frame, resembling Mary's strapped to her hospital bed, only this time upright. This abomination attacks James, marking the beginning of the game's final boss fight. The battle unfolds in 3 phases, but in reality the differences are minor. The only real change comes in phase 2, when the fight shifts into a tighter space and the monster starts attacking from above. Eventually, after soaking up enough bullets and few whacks from James' rusty pipe, Maria collapses to the floor, leaving us to finish her off. And with that, the ending begins. In the remake, there are 3 main endings and a whopping 5 additional ones. Let's start with the good ending, the Leaf ending, which I got in my first playthrough. After defeating Maria, James finds himself at Mary's deathbed, the very same place where he smothered her. For the first time, he gets a chance to let go of his guilt and ask his wife for forgiveness, and he does exactly that. But Mary tells him not to apologize, reminding him that she herself had said she was tired of the pain. James confesses, though, that he didn't kill her to end her suffering. He admits the brutal truth. He had grown to hate her, and he wanted her gone so he could get his life back. Mary then asks a devastating question. If that's true, then why does James look so sad? A question that James can't answer. After that, Mary places in his hands what he had been searching for all along, her real letter. Next, we see James finding Laura, doodling on the same wall where the first conversation had taken place. He shows her the letter so she can too read its contents. Mary's voice begins reading it out loud. At first, the words mirror the imaginary letter James carried with him throughout the game, but the newly revealed part gives the opening lines a whole new meaning. Mary writes about how much she's truly suffering, how lonely she feels. She admits she knows she ruined James' life, and as much as she wishes she could undo it, she can't. Her last days were filled with sorrow and bitterness at life's unfairness. That's why, when the doctors gave her a final chance to go home, she was so grateful for one last opportunity to see James again. Mary explains that she never stopped loving him, and though their story ended in tragedy, she wouldn't trade it for anything. In Letta's final words, she asks James to remember her as she once was, and not the broken shell she became. And most importantly, she asks him to look forward, to keep living for himself and for others, just as he once lived for her. The game closes with James leaving Silent Hill together with Laura, who has also forgiven him, and from the looks of it, James intends to honor Mary's wish by adopting Laura as his daughter. The second ending is called In Water, and in terms of meaning, it's the bad one, and personally my favorite. After defeating Maria, we see James sitting behind the wheel of his car, parked in the very same lot from the beginning of the game. With a completely vacant stare, as if speaking to his late wife, he admits that he misses Mary. That despite all his attempts to let go of the past, he simply can't live without her, and he can't forgive himself for what he has done. He understands that Mary would have wanted a different outcome, but what does it matter? She's gone. In one last desperate attempt to imagine her life again, he glances toward the back seat, but all he sees is her lifeless body, covered by shit. Immediately afterward, he starts the engine, and we hear the car accelerate, smash through the guardrail, and plunge into the lake. Mary's letter is read once more in her voice, this time as we watch the envelope sink into the dark waters of Toluca Lake. The text is the same, but because of the grim context of this ending, her wish for James to go on living feels indefinitely more tragic. The third ending is called Maria, and it changes not only the scene after the final boss fight, but also the cutscene that comes just before it. To unlock this ending, you have to give Maria a lot of attention throughout the game, essentially treating her with care, almost as if you are courting her. One of the key factors here is visiting Maria's room in Brookhaven Hospital. The core idea is that James completely fallen under her spell, and now she is all he thinks about. In the rooftop cutscene, we don't see Maria pretending to be Mary. Instead, it's actually Mary herself. But when James sees her, he doesn't rush into her arms. And when Mary asks him whether he truly wanted to see her, his answer is unconvincing, half-hearted at best. Mary instantly recognizes the lack of sincerity. She reminds him that he killed her. and James tries to justify himself, insisting he only did it to end her suffering, but Mary sees right through him. She knows the real reason, that his actions were driven by hatred. She had become a burden to him. She couldn't give him what he wanted, a lone, happy life, unlike his new beloved Maria. Mary accuses James of stealing away her final precious moments, something she can never forgive. Then she transforms into a monster and attacks. After killing his wife, James goes straight to Heaven's Night, where he finds his new obsession. Maria hands him Mary's letter, and together they leave Silent Hill. On the way out, Maria suddenly starts coughing, and James, already familiar with what that means, advises her to see a doctor soon. The additional 5 endings can only be unlocked in New Game Plus, which becomes available after your first playthrough. In New Game Plus, new items appear in the game world that weren't there before. By collecting these items, or performing specific actions in the right places, you can unlock one of these alternative finales. In the original release, there were only 3 of these bonus endings, but the remake adds 2 more. The first of the new ones is called Stillness, which is essentially an expanded version of the In Water ending. James, once again, sits behind the wheel of his car, speaking to Mary about how much he misses her. But unlike In Water, this time, Mary actually appears in the backseat, desperately trying to comfort him, though her efforts are in vain. Longing for his wife, James stares at her reflection in the rearview mirror and asks if she will wait for him. Mary replies that she always has, and just like before, James starts the car, accelerates, and plunges straight into the lake. The second ending that is unique to the remake is called Bliss. To trigger it, James must obtain a special bottle of liquid and drink it in room 312 of the Lakeview Hotel. The tape recording plays out as usual, but diverges when Mary asks James to promise they will visit Silent Hill again one more time. And this time, she doesn't begin coughing. Instead, James, who has been off camera, sets the camera down on the table and embraces her, giving his promise. Mary begins packing for the departure, while James walks back toward the camera, briefly pausing in thought. When Mary asks if he's alright, he smiles warmly, for the first time in the entire game, and assures her that everything is fine before switching the camera off. The final shot shows room 312 once again, but James is gone. The remaining 3 endings are carried over from the original. The only serious one of them is Rebirth. Having discovered that Silent Hill is home to ancient mystical forces, James gathers several artifacts, said to defy death itself. Armed with them, he faces the final boss, and this time, he doesn't fall for Maria's disguise as Mary. Maria tells him he is a fool for turning her away, since Mary is dead. But James replies that there is another way. First, however, he must destroy the part of himself that still longs for Maria. Another fight begins, and once again Mary is defeated. Afterward, we see James rowing a boat across Toluca Lake, and Mary's corpse lying beside him. He whispers an apology to his beloved for disturbing her rest, but admits he can't live without her. His only hope now is to seek the blessing of Silent Hill's ancient gods and perform a ritual to bring Mary back. The other 2 endings are joke endings, reminders that no matter how heavy and depressing the story gets, this is still a video game. The first is the legendary UFO ending. By interacting with a mysterious blue gem in specific locations, James eventually uses it one last time in room 312. He steps out onto the balcony, where he notices strange lights above the hotel, and a flying saucer descends. In the original 2001 version, the ship contained Harry Mason, the protagonist of the first game. But in the remake, it's James Sunderland himself, but the version from the original game. He calls himself the real James, dismissing the remake's protagonist as nothing more than a clone. Then aliens knock out modern James and abduct him aboard the ship, leaving the old-school James to continue searching for Mary in the remake's world. And finally, my personal favorite, that dog ending. This one plays off the classic "it was all a dog's dream" trope. While exploring the town, you can find a special dog key, which unlocks an observation room next to room 312. Inside, you will discover a Shiba Inu wearing headphones, pawing at a control panel, apparently orchestrating the events of the entire game. In the original, James addresses the dog in Japanese, but since the remake was developed by a Polish studio, he now speaks Polish. Realizing that his entire journey was just the work of a dog, James breaks down in despair, only for the pup to lick his face. The game ends with the two of them gazing into each other's eyes in a strangely tender moment. So that is Silent Hill 2 Remake, and what can I say? I am absolutely blown away. No joke, this is one of the best survival horror games and one of the best remakes on the market in my opinion, period. And you can't accuse me of bias here either, because I was never a long-time fan of the series. This was actually my first time playing it. For me, this remake stands right alongside the Resident Evil 2 and 4 remakes. And honestly, hand on heart, it might even surpass them when I think about the sheer mix of emotions and enjoyment I got out of playing it. Sure, there are a couple of odd quirks you could nitpick, like the simplistic combat system, some optimization issues on PC, and a few other minor things. And even when you put those complaints together, they are still insignificant compared to the fact that we got an ideal remake. One that completely captures the spirit and atmosphere of the original. Now, I will be real, I'm not usually a big horror fan because it's been a long time since a game has actually scared me, and cheap jump scares or loud noises don't do it for me. But Silent Hill 2 managed to bring back that raw feeling of unease, the kind when you just sitting there, listen to the eerie ambient sounds, and suddenly you are genuinely uncomfortable in your own skin. And the story? Man, I don't even know where to start. I don't think there is much point in singing more praises for the original narrative. Pretty much every gamer already knows it's the gold standard for horror storytelling, and honestly for game storytelling in general. It swallows you whole, chews you up, and spits you back out. And when the final cutscene ends, you just left sitting there, staring at the screen, trying to process what you have just been through. And let me share a personal story with you. My wife prefers when I play games on PlayStation instead of PC, because then she can lie next to me on the couch and enjoy the experience as a kind of a backseat gamer. Thanks to that, we have gone through quite a lot of games together, with varying levels of brilliance. But only 2 games have left us both in absolute silence afterwards. Me just staring at the screen, and her quietly shedding a tear beside me. One of those games was Red Dead Redemption 2, which I will definitely make a video about at some point. And the other was Silent Hill 2. Like I said before, the brilliance of Silent Hill 2's story lies in its ordinariness. It tackles everyday humans' issues like sexual abuse, bullying, and the crushing weight of guilt. Not some abstract demons out of nowhere, but real, tangible themes that trigger genuine fear and horror, because these are things anyone might have to face in real life. In my opinion, if you have never played the original and you want to experience Silent Hill's 2 story for yourself, do not hesitate, go play the remake. You will get the same powerful experience that the old fans once did with the original, but now wrapped in better graphics, smoother gameplay, and a more accessible package. Bloober Team honestly deserve massive credit for what they have done here. They completely reworked the original game while staying laser focused on the details. They even went the extra mile with tiny details, like how James' face and fingernails gradually change over the course of the game. And the soundtrack, oh my god, I had already heard about it long ago before I even bought the game, and it completely lives up to the reputation. The samples from the original soundtrack are still there, and they sound just as incredible today. And most importantly, they didn't ruin it, just made subtle adjustments while preserving everything that made it iconic. So once again, Bloober Team, massive respect to you. Despite the absolute shitstorm of criticism you got before release, like people bringing up your weaker projects, mocking the trailers and so on, in the end you delivered something truly great. A remake that stands as the worthy successor to the original. Now, I'm sorry if my conclusion feels a bit messy or rambling, but honestly, after finishing this game, I've got so many emotions and thoughts swirling around that I don't even know how to structure them properly. I just hope I managed to convince some of you to try this remake if you have never thought about it before. And for the veterans of the series, I hope I managed to share my childlike excitement for this masterpiece without screwing up any of the story explanations or deeper meaning. Of course, if I did get something wrong, please let me know in the comments. I will gladly read your corrections. But yeah, this video has dragged on long enough, since I once again overwrote the script long enough for a movie. So let's wrap it up. Huge thanks to each and every one of you who stuck around until the end. Your support means the world to me, and every single like, comment, and especially subscription motivates me to keep making more videos. And if this happens to be the last time you ever hear my voice, well, thank you for spending your time with me. And no matter when you stumble upon this video, know this, I'm already working on the next one. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.